as we've gone through actually the end of Bava Kama and the beginning of Bava Metzia, we've been circling around questions of lost objects. And now in the second chapter of Bava Metzia, we are really going to home in on the lost object and the obligation to return it. So chapter 2 of Bava Metzia is the chapter of the lost object. And it actually is one of the first chapters that they teach children, whether it's because I don't know why, maybe the idea of finding something and returning it is something that all children can relate to. Anyway, when we begin this chapter, we go back to Psukim. We've got new Psukim that we can look at. First of all, from Mishpatim, where we've already seen a lot of the halacha of Nezikin is learned. So in Nezikin, ki tifka shor oivcha or chamoro, you see your enemy's ox or his donkey. This is not your friends. This is your enemy's ox or your donkey. Toeh, and it's gone astray. Hashev teshiven mulo. You have to return it. Even if it's your enemies, you have to return it. And the halacha is filled out in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, at the beginning of Kitei Tzei, the 22nd chapter. Very often, by the way, the halachas is expanded and embellished in Sefer Devarim, in Deuteronomy. And the Torah there says that we don't, if we see lo tiret shor achicha or et save nidachim, we don't, if we see our brother's ox or his sheep, which is wandering, v'hit alam tamehem, and hide, we don't hide ourselves from him, hashev teshivim la'achicha, you shall return them to your brother. Really interesting that the Psukim in Devarim seem to make a distinction between your brother, someone who's part of your society, and someone who doesn't. But they repeat the idea that you have to return them. And if he's not close, you have to keep the object in your house, and if necessary, feed it if it's an animal until he wants it. And the verses say, Ad derosh achicha oto, until your brother comes to seek it. Rashi comments there, this idea of seeking, well, it's obvious that you're not going to return it before he seeks it. But this idea of seeking, you have to seek out information so he wouldn't be a fraudulent claimant. So we are going to do this with our brother, someone who's in society, but we're still going to check that there's no fraud here. And we're going to extend this to all kinds of other objects. We're going to do it with his ass. We're going to do it with his garment. We're going to do it with every lost thing that your brother has. And we can imagine, by the way, that if we took this to extremes, society would break down. I mean, if I find a hairpin in the street as I'm walking home from shul, do I need to return it? I don't know who this hairpin belongs to. And the Gemara has this concept of yi'ush, of despair. The Gemara will ask, well, perhaps given that the hairpin has no marking on it, and it's of minimal value, the owner might despair when, after realizing it's gone, of ever receiving it in return. And this despair, yi'ush, is the expression in the Gemara. This despair allows title to transfer to the finder. And the first Mishnah in the second chapter, in other words, the classic Mishnah finding, focuses on this question of when do we have title transfer? When can a finder say, okay, these fines belong to me? And when does he need to return them? And of course, if he needs to return them, if he doesn't know who they belong to, he needs to announce that he's found them. Otherwise, well, the owner will never come to him. So the Mishnah begins, Elu Metziot Shelo Elu Chayav Lachri. So these fines belong to him, and these he's obligated to announce. It's not enough that he just keeps them in his house until the owner shows up. He has to announce them. He has to publicize it. I found such and such. So these belong to him, and these must be announced. Let's look at the list of what belongs to him. And let's think about this idea of yi'ush, of renouncing hope. We'll see that the common thread in these items is they're all items that have no distinguishing mark, perhaps. There's no way of connecting them to the owner. So maybe going back to the idea that Rashi quotes from the Sifrei, that, the finder has to take care that there's no fraudulent claim. If there's no mark on them, how does he know who the owner is? Let's have a look at the Mishnah. Elu Metziot Shelo, these belong to him. Matzah perot mefuzarin, he found fruit just scattered around, fruit just lying on the ground. Ma'ot mefuzarot, he found coins just scattered around. Krechot birshut harabim, he found skrechot are sort of bundles of sheaves in the public domain. Igulei devela, cakes of figs. They used to, when they harvested the figs, they'd compress them into cakes, into circles. That's how they kept them kind of half dried. And basically, that the cake of figs is sort of the standard. It's the standard way of keeping figs, but there's nothing to distinguish, one person's cake of figs from another. It's just a lump of figs. Kikarot shel laftom, loaves which have been made by the baker. So if they've been made professionally by a baker, there's no way really of distinguishing whose they are. It's just a loaf, right? It's just a loaf that came out of the bakery. Umachruzot shel dagim, strings of fish. V'chatichot shel basar, cuts of meat. Vegizei tzemer habaot midinatan, stalks of wool shearings that have just come from the country. In other words, they're just straight off the sheep. Ve'anitzei pishtan, stalks of flax. Ulushonot shel gaman, strips of purple wool. Hare elu shelo, these all belong to him. There's no way of finding the owner of these, or at least of proving the owner of these. We assume the owner would give up hope if he lost these, so they belong to him. Rabbi Yehuda is going to firm up the definition. Rabbi Yehuda omer kol sheyesh bo shinui chayav lachariz. Rabbi Yehuda says anything that's got an alteration, in other words, a special thing about it, anything that's got an alteration, chayav lachariz, he has to announce it. That's the point. If it's got a distinguishing feature, we have to announce it. Keitzat, how does it work? Matzah igul tucho cheres. So he found a cake, and there was a potsherd embedded in the cake. Kikaruv tucho ma'ot. Maybe he found a loaf, and there are coins in the loaf. So we can distinguish it. We can announce, hey, I found a loaf and coins in it. Come on, tell me if that matches your loaf. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar omer kol klei ampuria eino chayav lahachriz. The next Mishnah will produce a whole list of things where we don't have to make an announcement. But so often, as we've seen in the Mishnah, one Mishnah drifts chain-like into the other. And this Mishnah is closed with Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, who says, look, there are certain things we don't have to announce. What are these things? Called play anpuria. If it's an anpuria, if it's gear of anpuria, we don't have to announce it. Now that's very important, probably, but the problem for us is we actually don't know what ampuria means. And Jastrow actually says It's something to do with business stuff, merchandise. He says merchants' implements. So straps and poles and stuff for carrying goods. Maybe this is the kind of stuff that you would use to load up your wagon. And maybe, gosh, maybe everyone's loading their wagon. And if you leave a strap behind, well, maybe the merchant's already gone to the next town. You find a strap used for loading a wagon. You don't have to return it. It's gone. The guy's left town. He's given up hope. The Gemara and the Bartanura. I mean, the Gemara has a different view. The Bartanura is going to quote really the Gemara. The Bartanura says this is essentially manufactured stuff. Really interesting view about manufacturing in the time of the Mishnah. Kelim chadashim shelo svatan ha'ayin. New gear that isn't familiar to the eye. It's not familiar looking, but ein la ba'alim b'hem teviyat ayin. The owner hasn't got used to how they look. If the owner isn't used to how they look, well, how's he going to make a claim? And the Bartanura makes clear that we're going to recognize the claim because the owner recognizes the object. How does the owner recognize the object? So according to the Bartanura, quoting the Gemara, these are the anpuria, manufactured objects. But they are the only things that we don't have to announce. Oh, he closes, by the way, the Bartanura with the words, Uve'ir sheruba Yisrael chayav lahachriz. In a city with a Jewish majority, there's an obligation to announce, even for the manufactured goods. So, and again, we saw in the verses that in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, they seem to make a distinction between Jews and non-Jews. And already the Bartanura is hinting that in places where, with a Jewish majority, and by the way, medieval commentators like the Meiri would extend this to people who are, so to speak, mugbalot bedat, who have religious principles. Essentially, people who behave like us. People who behave like us, we have a different obligation from if we're living in with savages. And of course, Romans were savages in the eyes of the people of the Mishnah. Someone who sends their slave out into the gladiator, out into the circus to be killed by a gladiator or to be killed by a lion. That's not a normal person. It's not someone who he doesn't behave like according to normal morality. That's what the rabbis of the Mishnah are thinking about when they talk about non-Jews. It's not a racial thing. It's a behavioral. But let's go on to the Mishnah. These have to be announced. So you find one of these, you have to put a notice in the newspaper or put a notice on the notice board. If you're in a school, you can put a notice up in class. Matzah perot bakeli. Someone found fruit in a vessel. So the vessel it'll be someone's vessel, right? We can't distinguish the fruit, but we can distinguish the container. Or kli, or keli kamotchehu, or just some vessel. We actually didn't even find the fruit in it. We just found the vessel. Ma'ot bakis, we found money in a wallet. Or kis kamotchehu, we just found a wallet, just an empty wallet, but we assume someone knows what their wallet looks like. Sibure perot, we found piles of fruit. Looks like the fruit had been piled up somehow. Sibure ma'ot, we found a pile of money. Someone's put down this money somehow. How much money do you need to make a pile? Well, we talked in the previous Mishnah about how many documents you need to make a bundle. And there were 3 documents, by the way, right here. 3 coins on one on top of the other. If you've got 3 coins on one on top of the other, that's a pile. It's not scattered coins. 3 makes a pile. Homemade small sheaves which are actually in the private domain. So they're in someone's yard. So you assume he put them there. Vekikarot shel baal bait. Loaves of bread which are made homemade, made by a householder. Well, if the householder made them, we consume that, he knows what shape he makes it. Everyone knows what shape they make their loaf, right? Everyone can recognize their loaf. Even today, you can recognize your challah if you regularly bake challah. Wool shearings as they come from a craftsman's shop. So they've been worked on, these wool shearings. Shemen, and jugs of wine and jugs of oil, because of course the jug will have a marking on it. I mean, the oil is indistinguishable, but the jug, absolutely the jug, will have a mark on it. Chayav lachriz. He has to announce. He has to put a notice in the paper, or a notice up, maybe a notice on Facebook today, or a notice up on the notice board.